Whenever you have lunch and somebody else doesn't have lunch, you don't have to give them enough to fill their stomach. But if you give them even a small piece, you will get to eat your lunch and enjoy it. And you will feel better that you gave them some and you will enjoy your lunch. So just share your lunch.
Mm.
That I think stayed with me in my subconscious in a way where I wasn't even thinking about that throughout the years. But I know that throughout my life, I felt, always to share with someone else, to give someone else who seemed to not have as much as I did, even when I didn't have a lot.
Welcome to Attitude of Altitude podcast, presented by Planet of One. We're sharing stories and conversations, encouraging and empowering listeners to be bold, take action, and be your best self, so we may be the change we desire to see in this world. Know that your attitude determines your altitude in life. Welcome to the podcast. You guys are in for a treat. Sylvia Morrison is a phenomenon, is how I see her. She was born in Jamaica and was raised there, educated there, and then moved to Canada. And then from Canada, she has moved to Ghana. And she has this very endearing way of living her life with a mission and a purpose. And I'll allow her to elaborate on that in a couple of minutes. And she is the founder and director of Links Across Borders. And I'm not going to tell you much more because you're going to hear all about the great, juicy stuff in this podcast. So, Sylvia, welcome again. I would love for us to start with Jamaica. What was life like for you in Jamaica growing up? Let's start
Mm,
with the background so people can get a feel of who you are.
okay. Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity to be here to share with your audience. So thanks for inviting me.
Of course.
Yes, I grew up in Jamaica, and and I'm a country girl. I usually like saying that to the people in the city, because I grew up in a small rural community in Jamaica, Samuel Prospect. Just in case somebody is listening, they might be happy to hear that Samuel Prospect is online. Um, and growing up in my what I will call my village, um, the families, women, children, men had relationships that were really dynamic. Um, Most of us there were poor in terms of having material resources, and but rich in terms of how dynamic our lives were and how we engaged with each other. One of the things that was striking and hard for me growing up was the fact that I could hear from time to time women screaming as they were being beaten by abusive partners who were men. And that's something that has stayed with me until now. I would remember, and it was usually mainly on weekends. You think of it. It was usually on weekends, and now I have an understanding as to why it was on weekends. But I'll just say I would hear the screaming, and my mother was the kind of woman who, for some reason, she wasn't being beaten because they were probably afraid to beat her. But she had a way of threatening the men who were beating their female partners. And she would call for the women to run to our house. And if they could make it in there, they're safe because she's not going to their house to pull them out. But if they could make it to our house, the man couldn't come into our yard. She would threaten him with such passion that I think they all believed that she meant it when she said, if you put your foot here, I will limb it off, which means I will chop it off with my cutlass. Um, and so I admired her passion and her strength and her courage to speak up like that. But I also noticed that it causes certain kind of fear on one hand, but determination on the other hand that that will never be me, you
Mm.
know. So that's something that I can remember very strongly. Another thing that I remember and missed over the years of being away from that in Jamaica is the way people shared with each other. You know, the women would, at the end of the day, when it's dinner time, you would see bags and dishes going from one house to the next house because women would just send dinners to their
Wow.
neighbors. And it's not that they know that their neighbor needs the dinner, but it's because there is a culture of sharing.
Mm.
And what I really liked about that was um, it means then that if you didn't have dinner that evening, you don't have to feel like you're going to beg somebody for some dinner. You know that someone is sending dinner.
Mm.
Dinner would show up, and it might not be enough so that everybody could have a full stomach of it, but there would be some dinner coming to you. And so those are two things that I really remember with yeah, very strongly in my heart from growing up there.
What
Yes.
gave you some hope of becoming who you are today,
Mm,
especially when we look at poor countries that have very little, like you said, in resources? What gave
yes.
you hope?
Easy one for me, books.
Mm.
Books gave me hope. There was a small library in my village, and I will never forget Miss Hilda, who has transitioned now for many years. But Miss Hilda was the librarian, Hilda Solomon. And each evening, each afternoon, when I would watch to see when she is passing my house to go to the library. And a few minutes after she passes my house, I would be behind her. I am on my way to the library. And I would spend, whether it was the 2 hours or 3 hours that she spent each afternoon for us to be able to access what's in the library. But I would spend that time there with her, reading, going through books, just being with books, and then leave with the two that I am allowed to borrow each time. And what books did for me was I got to travel the world through books. I lived many lives through books. I experienced many cultures through books. And I dreamed and imagined a life that was very different than what I was seeing around me, than the hardship, because the hardship is what I wanted to get away from, not the love and the warmth. And so books allowed me to do that. It was my escape and my hope. Yeah.
Oh, how much do you think poverty had to do with the atmosphere of abuse that's going on or that went
Mm,
on?
yes. I think it had a lot to do with it because I said earlier that I noticed, that the beatings were happening mainly on weekends,
Mm.
and that now I have a sense of why. Back then, as a child, it never occurred to me, but now, because men would get paid on Fridays and they would go drinking on Fridays, and the women are waiting for them to come home with money on Fridays so that she could decide what to do on Saturday about market. Maybe she was even waiting for that money to be able to prepare dinner on Friday. So Friday, a lot of the week came to a climax on Friday and depended on the money that was supposed to be coming in on Friday. but there were men who sometimes went out drinking and sometimes went out gambling on a Friday because that's also when they have some money. And, we might consider that gambling is a way of leisure for many people. It's a way, it's an outlet, it's a way to have fun. They're spending money, they're having fun with it. They're not thinking about losing. Everybody who is gambling is thinking about winning. So it's fun for them. And the men are not able to do that during the week because they don't have money to do that. And on the weekend, when they get it on Friday, they feel like, oh boy, I've worked all week. I should go have some fun. So they go out having some fun. And after they've probably had 2 drinks or 3 drinks, they have lost sense of their responsibility that she's waiting at home, family is waiting at home. And so she might speak up in a certain way. And patriarchy has taught him that she shouldn't talk to him like that. So he slaps her, right? So, yes, poverty has a big part to play in that because if there was enough resources for everyone, she wouldn't be waiting on him. He wouldn't be spending what's supposed to be for the family on drinking. He would have some money that he could go out for a drink with his buddies. And she would also have money to take care of the family. So it's, yes, poverty had a big part to play in that.
Why did you decide to go into education? Because you were an educator, right, in Jamaica?
Yes, yes, yes. And I was a teacher since I was a kid. I used to teach trees. I would teach the furniture in the house. I would teach stones. I mean, I love teaching because, when I was teaching the trees and the furniture, it helped my imagination and I got to practice because they were always getting the lessons right.
There's no
Yes.
arguing with that one.
No. Well, then, as I grew up and decided to become a teacher, part of it was because I really admired my own teachers. And then, secondly, I loved seeing what happened to students who didn't know, when they come in to the classroom at the beginning and they don't know, they are new, and then I got to watch the changes, the transformation that happened over time. And I really got to participate in that, not just observe it, but participate in it and cause it to happen as well. And I think, yeah, I think that's the main reason I got into teaching. And I really do love teaching to this day.
How
Yeah.
much does education impact the socioeconomic way of living and the kids and the future from your perspective?
Yes, it impacts their future. Let me talk about it from where I am right now. So I'm in Ghana. And I'm here because I am supporting children's education in Ghana through the library programs, Links Across Borders. And I see how if children in this village do not have access to education and better education than they have here, they don't really have the opportunities to think and imagine and dream about a life that is more, let me not say better, but more than what they see around them. It is through books and education that we get to know about another world. And when I say another world, I'm not just talking about the physical, the geographical, right? So I'm really talking about new perspectives, different ideas, a different viewpoint. You learn about other people and other cultures. You know, if children don't have access to education, they don't have that. It's almost like they're just allowed to grow wild,
Mm.
you know, and yes, education does some socializing that sometimes is damaging depending on how it is set up, because we really want to allow our kids to be free, to be themselves, to have their own truths, let's say. Yes, their own opinions about things. But it's also important that they have access to books and access to opportunities to create. For example, I take them out on excursions to just see their own world physically, geographically. And I can remember, especially one day, coming home from an excursion. I had taken the reading club on this excursion, and it's an excursion that I've taken my volunteers on many times, years in a row, because I had been doing that for many years. And I just thought these children should get to see these places that visitors from the rest of the world get to see. And so here we were. And on the tour, I said to the tour guide, speak in Ewe, which is the local language, because I want the children to understand fully what you are saying. What you are talking here, this tour is for them, and I want them to hear it. So, as we're going through, the tour guide is doing his thing and he's speaking in the local language. And they really enjoyed themselves. And we came home from that, and I reminded them that they're going to put together the stories of what they experienced today. So I'm just asking questions as if I wasn't there, and they're now sharing back their experiences today. And after a while of them piecing together what each one remembered, somebody said, no, this, they add this piece, and remember that, and they add another piece. And somebody said, Miss, no, Mama, they call me Mama. I am Queen Mother in this village, so I'm Mama Agbalenyo, the first. So she said, Mama, can I ask a question? So I said, sure, go ahead. She said, were we tourists today? And I said, tourist. Then I asked the question out loud for everybody. Were you tourists today? And then they had a conversation about who is a tourist and how could they have been tourists. And it occurred to them that today they were tourists, because tourists go to places that they want to learn about or they're interested in or curious to see. And they did that today. And they had a tour guide who took them around and taught them about what was happening there. And so we're tourists. And the place just broke out in celebration. That's because they thought tourists were only people who came from abroad and came here. So they couldn't be tourists. Only the people who came here as guests were tourists. That day they found it was a big light bulb, big celebration. One word, tourists. One concept, tourist. So education is very important.
Yeah. Changing perspective for them, that's for sure.
Absolutely, yes.
Take us back to how this all got started, because we haven't even gotten into the things that you've built, but take us back, you going from Jamaica to Canada and how all of this occurred.
Yes, thank you. So it started, I realized, and I didn't know when it started, that it had started long ago. Because I usually say it started in 2003 as I was talking with my friend Effie about Christmas shopping. But I realized it started when I was a little girl in Jamaica. And on this one day, I came home from school. I was still in elementary school. I think I was in grade 5 or 6. And I came home from school that day and I hadn't eaten my lunch. I was very hungry. And when I'm very hungry, the world knows. If they can see my face, they know. So
I understand that feeling.
so my mom looked at me and she said, "What's the matter with you?" And I said, "I'm hungry." And she said, "What happened? Did you eat your lunch?" And I said, "No, I didn't eat my lunch today." And she said, "Oh, so why didn't you eat your lunch?" And I said to her, "My friends didn't have lunch, and I didn't want to eat my lunch in front of them, and they don't have lunch." And she paused. She was quiet for a moment. And then she said to me, "So why didn't you just share your lunch with them?" And I said to her, "But it wasn't enough. So I couldn't share it with them and I couldn't eat it either." And she said, "Okay, I see." And she paused again and then she turned to me and she said, "Whenever you have lunch and somebody else doesn't have lunch, you don't have to give them enough to fill their stomach. But if you give them even a small piece, you will get to eat your lunch and enjoy it. And you will feel better that you gave them some and you will enjoy your lunch. So just share your lunch."
Mm.
That, I think, stayed with me in my subconscious in a way where I wasn't even thinking about that throughout the years. But I know that throughout my life, I felt, always to share with someone else, to give someone else who seemed to not have as much as I did, even when I didn't have a lot. So when I consciously started doing this was in 2003 when I was with my friend Effie and we had a conversation about Christmas. She was asking about shopping and I said to her I wasn't shopping because my kids were teenagers and I didn't really enjoy Christmas shopping, the hustle and bustle of it and the stress of it. And she said to me when I asked her the same question, she said to me she wasn't shopping either. But what she would be doing is sending money home to her mother in Ghana to make a Christmas party for children in her village. And immediately I felt in my heart, you could help with that. And so I said that to her. I would love to help with that. And she asked me, "Do you trust my mother?" And I said, "No, I don't trust your mother. I don't know your mother, but I know you. So I trust you. I'll give you the money." And I gave her $75. She reminded me that it was $75 because I didn't even remember. And so I gave her the money and she sent it to her mother along with the money she was already sending. And February the following year, her mom sent her pictures of the party and she brought them over to share with me. I looked at those pictures and my heart just opened much, much wider. And a certain kind of a feeling of, like I'm I've made such a difference in some children's lives with so little that I felt, oh my gosh, this is amazing. It's like I was injected with new life. And I think what also made it um, cause that the impact of it for me was I was at a time in my life when my marriage had just ended. I was raising two teenagers. I wanted to maintain our standard of living and knew that I had serious financial challenges at the time, which I didn't want them to experience or to be aware of. And so I was really struggling, trying to make it look like everything is fine. Yeah. And the struggle of that, keeping that quiet inside, keeping a good forward face for my children and for anyone else. But the suffering is happening on the inside. And then to be able to make such a difference, to bring joy to so many children far away in a place where I didn't even know them and they didn't know me, at a point in time where I felt like my life was falling apart. That brought me back to a place where I felt like, no, my life has meaning. I've made a big difference in somebody else's life. And so after that, we were talking more about the children. I'm asking questions. And she said to me, so many of these children don't go to school. Mm. And I just felt like, oh my, it's not so great. You gave them a Christmas party, and now what? And yes, a Christmas party is great, but I'm thinking about education. And so, again, something happened in my heart and said, you could do something about that. My situation still hadn't changed. I still didn't have lots of money. But, I felt I could do something about that. And so I said to her, tell your mother to send us a list of the names of children. And she did. And so I got the names. A few weeks later, she showed up and she said, here are the names of some children. And I just picked 6 names off the list. And I said, I want to pay their school fees. And so she connected me with the administrator of the school that was in the area. And I started paying their school fees and paid school fees for 3 years before I ever came to Ghana.
How much did your own beingness and perspective change when you began assisting these kids to get an education? Because you were feeling like your life was falling apart.
Yes.
And now you get to see what these kids are really going through. How much did that impact you and change you?
It impacted me to see what the kids were going through. It reminded me of my own childhood because I grew up in a village that looked similar to this one and the others that I was visiting. So it reminded me of where I came from and how education was my saving grace, I will call it. Yes. And it brought me to a place where I had to think, can you do something? And if you choose not to, regardless of the size, the magnitude or smallness of what I could do, if I choose not to do it, what am I really saying to these children? Yeah. It brought home for me a sense of, as a human being, we have the responsibility, whether we recognize it or not, to take care of each other. That's what we're here for, to serve each other. And serving each other is presented to us in various ways. And I also believe that everyone has a feeling inside of themselves, this knowing that we are here to do and give and serve for and to and with each other. We know it. We feel it from time to time. There are times when we act on it and other times when we suppress it. There's some of us who act on it all the time without even thinking. And then there are others who think so much that they don't act on it. And they're feeling sometimes a sense of guilt or a sense of shame, even when no one else is shaming them. But they feel it because they know that inside of them there is something that wants to serve. I say this because I remember that when I said to folks around me, my circle of people, the first time when I decided to come to Ghana, and I just announced that I was going to Ghana, and it was like 5 months before I left that I announced I'm going. No plan ahead of that. It was just an idea that dropped in my heart, and I just announced it. But individuals who knew me, and many of them were not really close friends, they are people who knew me. And they started asking me, what are you going to do there? And I would say, I'm going to visit the children whose school fees I've been paying since 2003. And they would say, oh, what are you bringing? Yeah. And I would tell them what I'm bringing. Of course, I don't have money to buy those things, but that's what I'm bringing. And I would tell people, I'm bringing school supplies, I'm bringing clothes, and I'm bringing toys. People went out and bought me school supplies and clothes and toys. Some of them had it at home already because, sometimes we go shopping for things that we don't really need, or we buy for our kids and they say, I don't like it. And so we have it, right? And so I had more stuff to bring than I had luggage to put them in. Yes, because folks want to do this. They want to serve. This is only one of the ways of serving, but there are many people who want to do it. Because when we give to others, we feel an expansion in ourselves. And the expansion is in us, and it's also in them as they're receiving. The smile, the thank you injects us with life in a certain way. And yeah, it changed my perspective. I believe everyone wants to give. I believe everyone can give. And I believe in the exchange of giving and receiving, that's what we're here to do.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly on that one, that there's always a way to do something, whether if it's not financials, it's your time, it's your efforts, it's your mentality. There's always ways to make a difference in others' lives if we would make the choice and take the responsibility that we're all connected and we can make a difference.
Yes.
Sylvia, you chose to continue your education in Canada. What did you choose to study?
I felt I got onto that bandwagon because I started volunteering at a rape crisis center in Ontario. And it opened up my eyes in a certain way to violence against women. And remember, I said that I grew up in an environment where I would see that happening around me. And so I think when I started volunteering in this rape crisis center, it reminded me somehow, although I wasn't really conscious of it, but it brought back this fighting, this passion for no, this is wrong. And now I was in a place where I could do something about it. So I started volunteering. And during the volunteer training, I noticed that there was information that, wow, this was new to me. Lots of new. But I also realized that, and the counselors at the center and the folks who worked there said to me, you really are natural at this. You're really good at this. You seem to have been doing this for a while. Of course, I had never done it before. Maybe watching my mother, my mother. And so I started searching to find out, is there a place, is there a program at any institution, educational institution, where they would teach me how to do this formally, the knowledge that I am lacking, the skills that I don't have in terms of counseling and advocacy and how to listen and how to educate, and the perspectives about violence against women and its impacts on women's lives and families and people in general. And so I found the program, the AWCCA program at George Brown College in Toronto. And I went back to school to study that. And I, I went back as if I had not even completed school before. I just went back as a mature student. And I did so well in the program because it was something that I loved and something I was passionate about, and was involved in a project at the college that then caused my name to be known throughout the college. And so at my graduation, as I was receiving the Dean's Medal, she whispered in my ear, "There's a chair on this platform for you." And yeah, that really meant something for me. Yes. Although I wasn't looking forward to filling the chair right away because I was thinking, really? Like, how does that happen? But it said to me that I had arrived at a particular place and point in time that I had dreamed of and didn't realize that it was right here, you know? Yeah. So I studied counseling and advocacy, and then moved on to teaching it at the college afterwards.
That's so impressive, honestly, all the things that you've accomplished and getting honored for what you've learned and the pathways that you have chosen to implement it. Because violence is violence no matter where you look in the world. And
Absolutely.
there's a cause and effect in it. It doesn't just show up in our lives.
Mm.
Something is causing it. Counseling, obviously, from your experience, you can say helps person evolve to understand what's happening within their lives so that they can begin to alter it.
Mhm.
For me, the perspective of what you're doing, the teaching and the education is how do we begin to influence the thinking of everyone so that we don't end up in those spots? How do we move the world forward and start sending resources to the right places so
Mm.
that we don't have poverty? We don't
Mhm.
have the things that instigate and allow people to think that it's okay to treat someone else that way.
Mhm.
Would
Mhm.
you elaborate in your own way on this whole process and then continue telling us about how you took the 6 students and what you launched in Ghana from all of that?
Okay. Okay. Let's see. The piece about looking at how violence impacts all of our lives. And I say all of our lives because I believe that when we consider male violence against women, when I started on that journey of addressing it and learning about how to address it, you know, it was, I was looking only at the fact that it's male domination of female. And my fight was on. Yes. Over the years, because I've seen the damage that has also caused when we are looking at male violence against female, rather than looking at violence as a thing that impacts everybody's lives, then we're not really solving the issue. We're not really addressing what needs to be addressed, because what needs to be addressed is the systems that are in place that cause violence in the first place. Yes. And so I realized that violence is violence, regardless of where it's coming from and who is perpetrating it, and that it impacts everyone's life. Even the man who is, in the case of male dominance, the man who is perpetrating violence is also being affected in a way that he is not even conscious. And so the system that causes that to happen is patriarchy. Mm. And that is what needs to be addressed. And if male and females together would join forces then and look at patriarchy and decide to dismantle that system, then it ends a certain kind of violence, and we can then move on to looking at another system, right? So I have a wider view when I think about violence now in that way. I think about the fact that violence, male violence against women, is not only affecting women, it also robs men of their dignity. And if men realized that, in fact, men who perpetrate violence against women, they would find ways to stop it themselves. So when I at one point in time, I was the person who was in charge of providing education around violence against women in the region in which I lived. And one of the programs that I initiated was going into schools and doing workshops in high schools for students in high schools around sexual violence and so on, because I figure if we're going to get to it, there's no point. If we're starting with older folks all the time who have experienced, up until, then we might not be making a difference so much. So if we at least get them at high school. And I had a way of, when I would go into the high schools to facilitate these workshops, I want to make sure that there are boys in the session. Mine was, no, we can't just have girls in here. So we're telling girls, cover your drink if you go to a party, and fix your this way and have some pepper spray. And what? Are we sending them out to battle? No. So I said, I would say to teachers, I'd like to have your male students in the workshop. So get them. And so they would be there. And I would get the male students so riled up because I would point out to them that society thinks that each one of them is possibly a rapist. Each one of you in this room is possibly a rapist because the statistics, points to that. And do you really want to be walking down the hallway and each teacher or each female student in this school, that they're looking at you and thinking that you are possibly a perpetrator of sexual violence when that hasn't even crossed your mind? They would get so riled up, so angry about this. And I say, good. Don't direct your anger towards me. You then need to join this bandwagon so that we change the system. So you can just be the loving, young person that you are and grow up to be the loving man that you are becoming. Because I know that you are not planning to be a perpetrator. But that's what society says. So we are telling girls to fix their skirts, to make sure they don't go here, that they cover their drink, that they make sure to have pepper spray if they have to pass you in a dark alley or something like that. We don't want that.
Thank
Yeah.
you for saying that, Sylvia, honestly, because so many people miss the fact that we're not fixing the problem to begin with. We're not fixing the system and the mentality that allows them to think that that's okay or gives them the leeway to be that way. And I'm talking across the world. I'm not talking any
Yes.
one particular nation, any particular race, any particular, where we don't teach them that each person is a human being and they deserve the right to be treated well,
Yes.
including you.
Yes. Yes.
So you pointing it out is wonderful. It's a great first step for them to begin to pay attention that, hey, it's not okay that someone looks at me that way. It's not okay that my best friend or so and so hurts their girlfriend or
Yes.
their wives or whatever. They begin
Mm-hmm.
to open up and understand this. And there's a lot of males that have come a long way
Absolutely.
in that
Yes.
perspective. We
Mm-hmm.
have a ways to
Absolutely.
go, but we're moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I see that happening. Yes. Mm-hmm.